one of our final influencing factors here is feeling lost. And Donna, how many times have we heard from caregivers that they feel lost in a relationship they may have had for 30 years? How can you feel lost when you love someone? How can you feel lost when you know so intimately the person in that pre-existing relationship? And it goes back to this idea that caregiving, when you add caregiving, you interpose caregiving on top of your pre-existing relationship, you not only lose parts of yourself, you lose parts of the we. And that is so disorienting, the term we use throughout the book, because it shouldn't be that way. You think, this cannot be. How is that possible that I feel lost with someone that I've been around for so long?
Yeah, there's, again, very rich conversation in the chat box. And Sue is saying, because it's not the same person you married.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You know?
Right.
And there are many things that can change the person that you married. And certainly, chronic disease, catastrophic injury, stroke, all of these things can profoundly change the person that you married. But it's funny, so can having a baby. And I don't mean to diminish any of these other conditions that necessitate a caregiving relationship. I sure don't want to diminish those, for sure. But I also reflect on, and I urge people listening to on it too, what are other things that have changed your pre-existing relationship? Have there been other things? Like maybe somebody took a job that required a lot of travel. And that changed your life and your we, you have hardly any together time anymore. Or you have a child and all of a sudden, I think of the family as being people with an elastic band around them, and all of a sudden the band breaks, right? And everybody needs to come back together, but the positions are all different now. And change is very, very hard to absorb. So it was helpful for me personally to reflect on some of the other changes in my life that were not caregiving, that changed my life, my expectations, my idea of future, past, changed these things profoundly.
I love the idea of the rubber band, Donna, that the idea that we think of our scripts as almost fragile, that if we modify them, they will break, when we're really emphasizing the flexibility of the scripts, that we must always adapt. And I think it's easier when one is a parent, to the extent that there are a wider spectrum of experiencing of parenthood or spousalhood. But when it comes to caregiving, people reduce it down to a kind of cliche. And so we must rework these. We must understand the breadth of possibility within the care relationship. So one way to do that,
because it's almost outside of our culture.
It is. You're right. It is. It's scary. It's stigmatized. It's taboo. Mm-hmm. Okay, Donna, you're going to lead the way, if you don't mind, in an example here. One way to figure out how we might feel lost in our relationship, and I'm going to challenge people simply to either do this privately or to share in the group. So insert your primary relationship into the blank here, okay? So that's your pre-existing caregiver relationship. Being in a blank relationship is like, we're asking you to complete the sentence with a metaphor, a comparison, right? So Donna, you've done this before, I think, when relaying your care experiences with your mother. So do you mind if you were going to put in being in a mother-daughter relationship is like?
Well, with my mom, my mother was very headstrong, very, very difficult to care for. She tended to sabotage a lot of things that we tried to put in place to keep her safe and so forth. So, and my mother was a big personality. And so being her daughter was always like sort of walking a bit of a tightrope. And there are various dangerous things underneath the tightrope that I could have fallen into with my mom at any moment. But I always managed to stay on that tightrope because my balance was good, and I kept my eye focused, and I felt like I was okay on that tightrope.
Wonderful. Okay, so hopefully, each of you are thinking about what, that's really kind of the pure primary relationship pre-caregiving, all right? So there's no right or wrong metaphors. It's just simply how you make sense of it, comparing it to something else. Donna compared her relationship with her mother to that of walking a tightrope, okay? So now we'd like you to insert your primary relationship into this same sentence, but we're adding the relationship caregiver. So being in a being in a blank caregiver relationship is like being in a daughter relationship with my mother as a caregiver is like, so you're adding the caregiver experience to it. So, caring for your mother as a daughter, Donna, was like.
So my metaphor for that is like I'm standing on the edge of a volcano, and I've managed to I got really too hot and singed from the fire of the volcano, but I've found a fireproof suit and I've put it on, but I'm not moving from the edge of the volcano. And I'm going to stand there for as long as it takes for the volcano to stop erupting.
So we see a very different metaphor emerge here. There's no right or wrong. It's just we're on the edge of a volcano versus a tightrope, okay? So these metaphors help us understand our own experiences with our loved one when you add the caregiver relationship into that pre-existing relationship. And so it might give us some insight, because if we don't put these out and make them explicit, they are competing within our heads in a way that we can't get hold of. We can't control them. And one thing that we can all get in our relationship a little bit more is maybe a little bit more control, simply because we understand the sources of the sources of our relational tensions, perhaps.
Yes, and something we talk about all the time, Zachary, is the fact that if you can find the words to describe the way you feel and what your life is like as a caregiver, if you can actually put words to that, you can tell yourself in your own head, never mind telling other people, which is very important too, but telling yourself in your own head, this is my life story. Caregiving is part of my life. It's not something separate from my life. Like, this is who I really am, the person before. I really am going to be me again when my loved one dies. I think a big part of what we're trying to do and what we believe in our hearts, you and me, Zachary, is that if we can create these life narratives for ourselves that we can share with certain other people and have some understanding from them because we are expressing it in ways that people can understand, then we've got a life story that makes sense, and we can act differently with other people out in the world to get more help or to find more peace in our own hearts and in our own families, because we're not competing. It's not our lived reality in competition with all of these other ideas of who we are and who we should be.
Such an important point that contextualizes all of these exercises, that we not only tell stories to other people, as you're saying, we tell stories to ourselves. And the stories, if we tell stories of our own experiences that are inauthentic and don't ring true with our everyday experiences, we oftentimes feel lost and alone and exhausted from an incapacity to render some value and meaning out of this integrated care identity that, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, is part of our relationships now in ways that we didn't anticipate, did not want perhaps, but is there. And rendering control is simply creating some coherence from those experiences. So maybe our participants on their own time can think about how their metaphors are similar, they're more pure relationship and then the caregiving relationship, and then how they may be different. And perhaps they may be incompatible to the extent that, how we're thinking about them makes it more difficult or challenging. This is really essential to the idea of finding, understanding what may be incompatible or what may be similar or different is really helping you find maybe what is sacred about the we of your relationship. And we've hinted at this throughout most of the exercises, is that in the midst of the encroaching caregiving responsibilities and duties, it oftentimes we have very little energy to focus on the relationship and what is so important to us about this new caregiver relationship that's added to our already existing relationship. If we don't engage in this, sometimes we might experience a bit of helplessness. We don't know where to start, Donna. We don't know where to end. We don't know what's going on. And we may give up hope about finding out and discerning some value in what we're experiencing. Almost everyone in the workplace talks about role burnout, and we hear this all the time, but we very rarely talk about relationship burnout, relationship exhaustion. And you and I talk about this in the book, and the idea that frustration and resentment are oftentimes byproducts of a challenging relational experience that we have no language to talk about or discuss. We've talked about the idea that not understanding how your relationship realities are impacting you can make you feel more alone and apart in this very isolating relationship to begin with. The most damaging, perhaps, part of the experience is if we lose the we and the us, it makes it more difficult to care for someone we love, doesn't it, Donna?
Yes, it certainly does. And, but I think the question that you had up just a minute ago about locating the sacred in the we of our relationship is really the medicine that we need to take against feeling overwhelmed by all of the elements of loneliness and incapacity to influence outcomes. I mean, that's a fancy way of just saying, I can't, anything I do, it's never enough. I can't actually make good things happen. That feeling of being helpless. And so, it was funny when I was writing The Four Walls of My Freedom, I was reflecting on many, many years of my life that I was not really able to leave home. I was caring 24/7, awake night care, very, very, very medically complex child, 98 hospitalizations now. And so I didn't do anything, really else except for look after our son for many years. And I started thinking about this idea of sacred. And I started thinking about what sacred meant in my daily life. And I started to look for it. I started to look for sacred in when I put the cream on his legs after his bath. And I would always massage his legs because he has cerebral palsy, so his legs are very stiff. And I would really rub the cream and pull on his leg to help him relax his muscles. And I thought about this as a sacred act. I began to change from a task to a sacred act of love, and almost like a prayer, to see his muscles relax, look at my own hands, think about how much I love him, and think about that the relaxing of his muscles, even for a few minutes with that massage, is success. Is success, my success. And that for me is being a good mom and connecting these ideas of sacred, success, good mom, good wife, because and and teaching my daughter to do it for my son is being a good mom for her and helping their sibling relationship. And it all began with this idea of sacred, making my caring act into a prayer.
Can't think of better words to wrap up what we talked about today, to make our everyday acts sacred. And one way to recognizing and finding, as you say, creating those moments of sacred is to know what's influencing those factors and what is possible in terms of what's shaping how we come to understand and experience and think about what we do and who we are. And, we thank our participants today for sharing your experiences, reflecting on your experiences, risking being with others in ways that perhaps you haven't before. We have talked today about those experiences and ideas that are in our book, The Unexpected Journey of Caring, the transformation from loved one to caregiver. We'll be with you for the next 2 weeks at the same day and time, and Donna will be leading those two, and I'll be joining as well. But if there are any final questions, we'd love to field them, and we thank you for your time and your willingness to allow us to a portal into your own experiences and the possibility that we can share a language that reminds us that we are caring for our loved ones, perhaps alone from others and apart from others, but we are together in shared challenges and shared opportunities.
We sure are. We are a tribe, a community.